Welcome to the Yappy Hour, powered by Yappily, the podcast for dog lovers who want to better understand and connect with their four-legged companions. I'm your host, Nathan Dunleavy, and today we're diving deep into one of the UK's most iconic and entertaining breeds, the Dachshund. Joining me is Nicky Hammel, a behaviourist and licensed breeder who specialises in long-haired Dachshunds. In this episode, we'll talk about what makes this breed so unique, the common behavioural challenges that pet parents face, and how to raise a happy, healthy and confident sausage dog. Whether you've just brought a puppy home or you're living with a feisty middle-aged sausage, this episode will be for you. We'll also bust a few myths, share some practical tips and reflect on why working with your dog's natural traits, not against them, is the secret to building a long-lasting bond. So grab a cup of tea, settle in and let's get started. Welcome back to the Yappy Hour, powered by Yappily. I'm your host, Nathan Dunleavy, and I'm so excited to bring you another episode today. Even more excited that we've got Nicky Hammel with us. Welcome, Nicky, in on the Yappy Hour. Nicky's actually a really good friend of mine, so it's just going to be like having two friends just having a chat about our favourite things, which is dogs, or in Nicky's case, Dachshunds, or Dachshund. I don't got to pronounce it properly now because I can never spell Dachshunds, but I struggle saying it sometimes as well. So brilliant. So Nicky, welcome to the Yappy Hour. I'm so excited to have you. Thanks for joining us. How's everything going in your world at the moment?
Yeah, really, really good, actually. Really good. Dog's all well, dog's all happy.
Yeah.
So yeah, really, really good. Really good.
Perfect. So tell us a little bit about how you came to work so closely with this iconic little breed and what sparked your love for Dachshunds.
Well, it's quite a long story, actually. So
We love a long story, so you fill
in
your
my
boots.
in my previous job, I worked for a high street bank as a mortgage advisor, and a really, really good friend of mine bought a Dachshund. And the more time I sort of spent with him and with her, the breed just kind of got me, really. And
Yeah.
I'd wanted one for quite a while before I got my first one. It actually took me, I think, about a year to persuade my husband to let me have a dog. Um, and yeah, that's how it's just kind of escalated from there, really.
Yeah.
And I became unhappy in my job at the bank and, sort of wanted a way out of it. So initially we kind of decided that we would set up our own home boarding and daycare service from our
That's right. Yeah.
and we really wanted to sort of nail down and specialize in Dachshunds because they can be a funny little breed and they really, really love their own breed, not always comfortable around larger dogs. So we wanted to kind
Right.
of, in our search for a service for ourselves, we wanted to kind of create something that other people could enjoy. I mean, there were a few services around like that, but
Yeah.
not all that many. So that's kind of where we started. And then as lockdown happened, that had a
Yeah.
major impact on the business. So I then kind of took that time to retrain as a behaviourist.
Yes.
And then
Yes.
I decided to kind of step away from that a little bit and then move into breeding. So,
Yes.
yeah.
And that's where you are now. So you're still doing a bit of behaviour work, aren't you?
A little bit here and there, but
Yeah.
my primary focus really is on my breeding program.
Is the breeding, yeah. So
Yeah.
you did sort of specialise in. So I have said it wrong. So I'm saying Dachshund, but you've said Dachshund. So is it Dachshund?
Dachshund.
Dachshund. So I want to make sure I say it right. So Dachshund. It's a bit of a
Yeah.
German word, isn't it? It's a funny
It
word.
is a German word, yeah,
Oh.
translated. So the translation from English to German is badger dog, which is what
Ah, I never
they
knew
were
that.
originally bred to hunt.
Yes. Okay, so I'm probably going to say it wrong all throughout this episode now, but I'm glad I double checked. So, yeah, great. So, similar journey to me. I worked in the bank and then obviously started off dog walking. Lockdown hit, had to shut down my business for a couple of weeks. And then I retrained in lockdown as a dog trainer and specifically separation anxiety specialist. Yeah, so haven't gone the full hog of you as being a licensed breeder, but did do a little bit of hobby breeding, hence why I've now got two poodles. So we love the little dogs, and yeah, it's great. So we're going to be moving on to our next section now, which is all about getting to know the breed. So what makes a dachshund a dachshund? I'm still struggling with that word. And I should have mentioned at the start of this episode as well that Nicky is another one of our breed specialists or breed experts. So we've had a few different breed experts on. So it's really great that we're going to be delving more into this fantastic little breed. So for those listening, for our listeners who don't know the breed that well, how would you describe a typical Dachshund in personality and temperament?
Personality, they're absolutely hilarious. For such a small dog, they've got such a huge personality,
They
and
have.
every single one of my dogs is different and brings something different. So, like humans, no single one of them is the same.
Yeah.
Um, Within the different coat types that you get within the Dachshund, there are three. Um,
Yes.
so what I do sort of find with mine is my short hair is a lot more kind of overexcited with life in general and everything, whereas
I know this one who you're talking about. So.
she was my first ever dog, bless her heart, and 7 years old.
Kimmy.
Oh, yeah, that's Kimmy. And she's an absolute angel. She is just quite hectic. Whereas the long hairs I do find a lot more chilled and a lot more laid back in general. See,
Yes.
there's variances between that, but
Yeah.
yeah. And they're just such lovely little dogs. They are lovely, and
Yeah.
they love to have a good run around, and they love their exercise. They love playing, but at the same
Mm.
time, they like the balance of being able to chill and cuddle up with you as well.
Yeah. So they make a bit of a lapdog as well. So there's a wide haired
There
dachshund, isn't there,
is,
as well? Yeah.
there is.
Okay. And then you've got mini dachshund and then a standard dachshund. Is that right?
You do, yeah, two different
Yeah.
sizes. So yeah,
Yeah.
there's two different sizes in this country,
Yeah.
and it's the mini longs that I
Yeah.
breed. I don't breed the short hair, but yeah, just the mini longs.
They're the mini long-haired dachshunds. And
Yeah.
would you say that their temperament is different from the short-haired to the long-haired then as well?
Oh, in my experience, yes, but also not only with my own dogs, but from when I used to do daycare and boarding as well. Like,
Mm.
the majority of the dogs that I had would be the short hairs
Yeah.
um, in the daycare because they were more popular at the time. So
Right.
thinking back to what they were like, albeit they would behave differently in this environment to what they would at home, but
Mm.
just sort of a comparison with how I see like my long hairs, yeah, there is
Mm.
definitely a difference there.
And I love it that you had to convince your husband to get like one 7 years ago. Now you've got loads.
I know. But you get
That's
to a point,
brilliant.
don't you, where you're like, well, what's one more?
What's one more? That's what happened to me,
Yeah.
but we've actually stopped at seven because we couldn't afford any more. But
I
yeah, I
can't
know what
even
you mean.
remember. I can't even remember a time when I had seven.
Yeah, well, as long as I've known you, which is a good few years now, you've always had quite a few. But yeah, I mean, little dogs, they make up a couple of big ones, so it's fine.
They do.
So my next question then was around what you think are some of the biggest misconceptions around the breed.
I would say there's probably two, which I see an awful lot. And it's around people just assuming that they're, because of their size, they're a lap dog and they're going to cuddle up with you and,
Mm,
just want human attention and that's it. Which,
mm,
to be honest, that couldn't be further from the truth because they are a working breed. Okay, you see
yeah,
a variance between each dog as an individual, and their desire to work and be a hound is it's more prevalent in some than in the others. And
yeah.
then the other thing that I see a lot is people calling them stubborn.
Oh, okay. And yeah, I hate that saying because there's no such thing as a stubborn dog, is there?
No, 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 no. And that's it. And, thinking back to, when I sort of do my behavioural work or, I see posts in Facebook groups and things like that, I think people kind of labelling them as that is actually are you motivating your dog enough for them to do what you want them to do, and do they
Mm.
understand what you're actually asking them to do? And
Mm.
yeah, so yeah, that's what I see a lot. And
Okay.
people notoriously say they're difficult to train, they're this, they're that,
Really?
and actually they're not. You've just got to understand them as a breed and
That's
work
it.
out how you can motivate them to do the behaviors you want them to do.
So it's all about tapping into that natural instinct, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, and every dog can be trained, but it's some dogs pick it up a lot quicker than others. You've got to put in the time, and yeah, it's about. And I'm a big believer in sort of people doing their research into the breed as well. That's really
absolutely.
important, isn't it? So that leads us nicely on to behavioural support for Dachshunds. So you've mentioned that obviously some people say they're hard to train and they're stubborn, but what would you say are some of the most common behavioural issues that you see in the breed, and what do you wish more owners knew about handling them?
I mean, I think probably the top behavior, you can hear one of mine now actually,
That's
which is
okay. I'm surprised mine aren't going.
yeah.
That's absolutely fine. It's all about the
One,
Yappy hour.
oh yes, and there's lots of yapping here. I would say probably the top behavioral problems I see is excessive barking, reactivity,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
probably separation. Although I don't tend to see so much of that now. That was a
Yeah.
really big thing, sort of around lockdown time when we were coming out of
Yes.
lockdown. Everybody thought that it was a great time to buy a dog because they were at home, and then of course they then went back to work and the dogs couldn't cope.
That's yeah.
So I don't really see an awful lot of that at the moment. It's more
Mm,
around the excessive barking, the reactivity,
yeah.
perceived aggression, and yeah,
Yeah.
that really.
And obviously, they're barking for a reason. It's a natural form of
Of
vocalization,
course.
communication for a dog.
Of
So
course, of course,
yeah.
and particularly with a Dachshund, they're a breed that was specifically bred to bark. So, when they would sort of go to ground after, sort of rabbits, badgers, and things like that, they had to be able
Mm,
to bark so the handler could actually locate, sort of where they were. So
that's it.
notoriously, they are a breed that is going to be more prone to barking because that's what they've been bred to do. So,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
that would be a top thing that really, if you're going to be looking to get a Dachshund, one of the top things that you really need to understand.
Is it they bark?
Yeah, they
Well,
do.
all dogs bark, but yeah, I mean, there's some that are going to bark more than others because they've been bred for a certain reason, and it's just
Yeah,
just the genetics, isn't it? And what you
yeah, of
know.
course.
And you saying about SA, I hadn't worked with many SAs in Daxies, but recently I just worked with a short haired one, but I hadn't seen many. It was mainly sort of like the cockapoos and the beagles that I'd been working
Really?
with.
That's
Yeah.
interesting.
So yeah, it's interesting. So how could someone strike the right balance between supporting their dog's emotions and setting boundaries?
So again, I think it's that piece around understanding your dog
Mm,
and, understanding what is natural behaviors for them, understanding that, with natural behaviors, you can't train those out of a dog. They're there and that's it. But I think, in terms of of setting the boundaries and being clear with what you want them to do is, actually being realistic with what you're expecting. Going
mm,
back to the whole barking thing, if you are going to expect that a dog is never going to bark, then, it makes it difficult, doesn't it? But it's,
yeah,
being able to work with your dog and
yeah,
actually teaching them that they don't have to bark all the time, and actually, kind of having a bit of control over that and rewarding them, for example, when they're quiet and,
mm.
so on and so forth.
Yeah, tapping into that, those natural instincts and giving them a different outlet with some sort of enrichment and brain games and stuff like that, really.
Yeah, 100%, 100%.
Yeah,
And, another example of that is, they're a breed that, are specifically bred to chase things because they're a hunting breed. And,
yeah.
this is something that I've experienced myself before I knew any better. One of my dogs would kind of be off chasing everything on a walk. And actually, you can almost like flip that and give your dog kind of access to things where they can chase things, so they don't then have to kind of go off and make their own entertainment. So yeah, it's
Definitely.
about setting those boundaries, giving the dog the proper outlet for
Yeah.
the natural behaviors,
Yeah.
and showing them alternatives.
Yeah. And like you say, it's about understanding what those natural behaviours are as well.
Yeah.
So understanding them and then sort of setting your dog up for success and playing to those strengths and giving those outlets, which I love that.
Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, brilliant. So we're going to move on to our next section. Thanks, Nikki, for that. So life as a responsible breeder. So you're a licensed breeder of
I
long-haired
am.
Dachshunds. What does responsible breeding mean to you, Nikki?
I think responsible breeding, I would say, I mean, kind of taking it right back. I mean, when I first started breeding, I I had my first litter, and then I didn't require a license for that. And I thought, right, I had a support from a really, really good friend of mine who
Yeah.
supported me and mentored me through it, because,
Yeah.
you know yourself, it can be quite scary when you're breeding,
It's very scary,
especially
yeah. Stressful.
especially, if things don't quite go as they should do. So I had my first litter, and I actually contacted my animal welfare officer, and I was kind of like, okay, I really, really want to apply for a license. And even at that point, she kind of said to me, she was like, well, how many litters are you going to be having? I mean, I didn't have that many dogs at that point. And she was kind of like, well, because you're not going to be having litters regularly, you don't actually need a license. And I was kind of like, well, I know I don't probably need it right now, but
But
actually
you wanted
want
it.
it,
Yeah.
because not so I can just say to people, oh, I've got a breeding license, but it was more around having, something in place where, I knew I was following what the government kind of set out as regulations to protect animals from a welfare perspective. I mean, it's not to
Definitely.
say if I wasn't licensed, I wasn't going to be doing that, but I would have followed it anyway. But to
Yeah.
obtain a license, you have to have the animal welfare officer come round and inspect your premises. They then come
Yeah.
back with a vet who spends a good amount of time inspecting your premises
Oh,
and going
okay.
through all of that.
Oh, I didn't know a vet did as well. Wow.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
yeah, when I first had mine, I had my animal welfare officer round, who I already knew because I was a licensed boarder.
Of course,
So
it's the same person.
yeah, so she came around and did an inspection, and sort of gave me some guidance about sort of things to put in place. And then the vet then comes round, and I think she was probably here with the vet for about a good hour, hour and a half, sort of
Oh,
going
okay.
in. They'll look through policies, procedures, they'll look through your premises, and all sorts of things like that. Um, and then they'll put together a list of recommendations of further things that they may want you to put in place, or things that they want you to change. And then once you've done all of those changes, the animal welfare officer then comes back again and re-inspects what you've already done and decides whether they're happy to sort of grant you your
Oh,
license. So for
quite
me,
quite a rigorous process.
yeah, that for
That's good.
me was one of the most important things to have in place. But then, sort of following on from that, it's making sure that all the breeding stock that you've got are good examples of the breed, being able to, select the best candidates for your breeding program, looking at things like health tests, the temperament of the dog, and, all bits and pieces like that. And then, it's once you've
Yeah.
actually then sort of made that commitment to breed, I think one of the most important things for me is, although I'm breeding puppies and bringing them into the world, and they'll go off to their new homes and things like that, ultimately, because I'm the breeder and I've brought them into the world, ultimately I have a responsibility for that dog from the day they're born right up until the day that they pass away. So, you
Yeah,
know,
and
one
that's
of
good.
one of the things I have in place with my puppy owners is I have a contract in place which basically says, if
Good.
at any point in your puppy's life you are unable to care for them, they must come back to me as the breeder, and I will take them
That's
back at any
amazing.
point within
I,
their
I
life.
don't I don't think a lot of breeders do that, and I think that's important. That
It
sets you
is really
apart.
important. And I think as well,
Yeah,
with the amount of pressure that's on rescue centres and things like that
yeah,
at the moment as well, I think, as a breeder, if you're just going to sell a dog to someone and then just almost like wash your hands and say, well, there you go, then,
yeah.
that's not being responsible really. And
Mm,
just sort of following on from that as well, it's the whole process that you go through when you select suitable families and owners for your puppies as well.
yeah,
It's not, I mean, I'm sure there's breeders out there that aren't as thorough, but for
yeah.
me, I have to know everything about a family and be completely comfortable with them before I'm going to let them take one of my puppies.
Yeah, no, that sets you apart from everyone else. And I think as well for us, it comes down to ethics as well, because we're part
Of
of
course.
like similar government bodies. And obviously, we've got like a moral compass and a certain ethics that we follow. So I
Yeah.
think from your perspective as well, the reason you did that is because it comes down to your own ethics and what you believe in
Yeah.
and your values.
Yeah, absolutely. And, just sort of going back to, the taking back of a puppy, if I mean, I always keep in touch with my puppy owners. When someone has a puppy from me, I always say to them, look, you're literally part of my family now and you're stuck with me if you're having this puppy. And,
That's lovely.
I always keep in contact with them. People like send me updates, videos, all sorts of things. And,
Yeah,
if I found out that someone was struggling and they hadn't come to me and that one of my puppies had ended up in a rescue or something like that. Not that I'm saying there's anything wrong with rescues, because there's absolutely not. But,
mm,
if I found out that one of my puppies had gone to a rescue, I would be so upset
yeah,
because,
yeah.
I would like to have that opportunity to always have them back myself.
You're so invested in the puppy
Yeah.
and their new guardians. Perfect. So moves us on nicely to the next question, which is about how do you support puppy guardians to feel more confident and prepared when taking home their new puppy?
So when people have a puppy from me, I mean, depending on when the puppy owner comes into it. I mean, some people I'll be in contact with even before a mating's taken place or a puppy's born or anything like that. And,
Mm,
some people it will be, a little bit further down the line when the puppy's a few weeks old. So, I have a lot of contact with my puppy owners prior to them taking their puppy home. They have the option to ask me questions at any time whatsoever.
mm,
And that's, prior to them getting the puppy, whether it be, sort of around feeding, equipment, set up at home, anything like that. I mean, when people come, because normally people will come for a visit before they take the puppy home. So a lot of this we'll talk about on that initial visit when they first come to meet their puppy. Um,
mm,
so we'll go through a lot of information at that point and people will have a lot of questions. But also when they take their puppy home, they go home with a full information folder of information around vaccinations, worming, health tests, all
yeah,
sorts of things like that. Um, and I always say to my puppy owners when they go, you've got my phone number, you can ring me or message me at any time, if there's anything you're not sure of, anything you're worried about, any support I can give you. you know
yeah.
I'm only ever a phone call or a message away, so they know that they've always got me basically.
I think that's fantastic because not everyone offers that or does that, and it's nice that they can feel supported. And it just says more about you as well that they're getting their puppy from a really ethical breeder.
Yeah.
Perfect.
And not only
Thank-
that, for as a breeder, and you'll probably know from, when you've bred yourself, there's nothing nicer than somebody who's got one of your puppies sending you a photo or a little video of their
Yeah,
dog
I
doing
still
something.
get. Yeah, I'm still in groups now, and I get updates. So I mean, it could be a year down the line, and I then get a message, and it's lovely. It's quite
Oh,
heartwarming.
it's so lovely. And do you know what? One of my puppy owners for Christmas this year, it actually made me a little bit emotional when I opened it. So I don't know if you've seen them, but you can get these like plates or plaques and things, and you can do like dog footprints on it or your kids' footprints
Yes.
and stuff like that painted. And they sent me like this little plaque with their dog's like footprint on it, and I was just like, oh,
Oh,
that's so
that's
nice,
cute.
so lovely, so
That's
lovely.
nice. Yeah, so you've picked, like you say, you do your research on the owners, they get vetted. So you've picked, you picked some good people there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've had people that, well, I think one person who's actually come back for a second puppy as well.
Yes.
So
Yeah,
yeah,
that's good.
that's been lovely as well.
Yeah, that's really nice. Perfect. So moving on to our next section. Thank you for that. So it's all around puppyhood to adolescence. So raising a happy and fulfilled dachshund. What are the key things you recommend for the new dachshund guardians to focus on during those early weeks?
So early weeks, I would say take things slowly. Don't
Mm,
expect too much, but at the same time, sort of start doing things as soon as you take pup home. Because I mean, obviously, while the puppy's with me, I will have done a certain amount of socialization and habituation. So, puppies will sort
yes.
of leave me with, sort of being comfortable around a variety of different people, particularly children as well. I'm very fortunate in that respect because a lot of the time you can hear stories about people's dachshunds not liking children and things like that. And
Right.
you know
Okay.
if they've never been around children or the new home doesn't have children, that can actually be quite difficult, especially if they've got family that have got children that then sort of visit them.
Mm,
So my
mm,
kids are, well, they're 9 and nearly 10 and nearly 18. So they're very very much hands on with the pups. They get handled by them. They get to spend a lot of time with them. So
yeah.
and they get to meet a different variety of people. We have visitors and things like that. And they have, a lot of the time, they're downstairs in an area of the living room where they can see everything that's going on, all the sights, sounds, smells, everything like that.
Mm,
I mean, some
mm,
breeders, will sort of have dogs in kennels and things like that. And, I don't know how much they get to experience a home environment, but, we make sure when our puppies leave that, they've kind of experienced most things that they sort of need to experience. And it's really about the owners, sort of keeping up on top of that and
yeah.
continuing to build on that, but obviously not doing things too quickly. Um,
Yeah.
so for them to sort of start doing that, and also as well, sort of getting them to build the pup's confidence, sort of
Mm,
alone and things like that. So, you know, the most tempting thing to do when you've got a new puppy is just to pick pup up and cuddle them all the time, which I'm not saying is wrong. We all do it. But
we
also
do.
letting them have that little bit of independence where they can kind of go and do their own thing and actually
Mm,
puppy proof in the home. So, it is safe for pup and you're not sort of almost like telling them no every 5 minutes or come here, don't do that. It's,
yeah.
giving them opportunity to be confident and, sort of go and explore without them
Yeah.
getting into trouble, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think the from my experience of working with puppy owners, the things they struggle with initially is probably like toilet training, and
Absolutely.
yeah. So,
Absolutely.
have you got any tips on sort of toilet training at all?
I mean, in terms of toilet training with mine, I will just sort of, after probably every sort of 15-20 minutes,
That's it.
I will
Yeah,
take them outside, particularly after they've eaten or had playtime or they've just woken
yeah,
up and things like that.
yeah,
I mean, we start toilet training with the pups around sort of 3 or 4 weeks. So we have them, sort of kind of in a whelping box up until 3 or 4 weeks till they get a little bit more mobile. And then and mum's really good at cleaning up after them, sort of
yeah,
when they're there. But as they get
yeah,
a little bit older, around, sort of 3.5, 4 weeks, we do
yeah,
sort of create in a pen, a separate sleeping and toilet area. So, they do start to understand the difference of, sort
yeah,
of where to go and where not to go.
Yeah,
And one thing I do sort of say to my puppy owners is don't fall into the habit of using puppy pads. I'm not
I
a person.
know.
I think they've got a place, but
Yeah.
personally, I'm not a fan of using a puppy pad indoors because I think it's confusing and it kind of teaches the pup that it's okay to go to the toilet
Yeah,
indoors.
you're encouraging them to go indoors, but I know that like for some people that were using them, I what I used to say was we'll put it by the back door and then slowly move it outside so that
Yeah,
the puppy knows to go. But with a lot of this, it is for long getting a new puppy, and we don't know what we don't know. So it's all
yeah,
about sort of education and research and stuff like that, and getting a reputable sort of dog trainer, positive reinforcement dog trainer early on. That's mine sort of probably having a scrap down there now on the floor. Yeah, getting help early on, I'm really big on sort of education, doing your research into the breed, particularly obviously if it's like, a breed that, like you say, you've not got kids or, you've not got a garden, you're just in a flat, that's going to make toilet training harder. Yeah, that's what I was going to say. So people don't realise that you have to be so rigid and get them out every sort of 15 to 20
yeah,
minutes. So I'd say like you just have to put them out. And even if they don't do anything, when
yeah.
they do go, you've got to fully praise them and reinforce that with a nice tasty treat. But like clockwork, you have to set a timer and get them
Yeah,
out every 15, 20 minutes. And like you said, after any form of excitement, play, eating, they've just woken up, you need to just put them out because they can't control their bladder straight
absolutely.
away.
Absolutely. And then, not getting upset if they do have an accident indoors because
Exactly.
it is going to happen.
It does. I used to say create the party outside, and all your neighbours probably think you're crazy. But when they do go outside, just wave your arms around and
Yeah,
get all excited. So I picked up on something else you said. So some of our pet parents listening, they may know they may have heard the word socialisation, but you mentioned it's another word I can't say. Habituation.
habituation. Yeah.
Yeah. Are you able just to tell us what that word means?
Yeah, of
If you
course.
don't mind.
So the difference, I mean, socialization, pretty much everyone knows what that means. It's,
Yeah.
introducing the dog to all living creatures, whether that be humans, dogs, cats, any other animals you might have in the house. But habituation relates to, sort of things that are in the environment. So sights, sounds, textures, all bits and bobs like that. Scent
Yeah.
as well. So what we sort of tend to do with our puppies as well, we do a bit of the early neurological stimulation and the early scent
Yes.
introduction. So the early neurological, what you call it, the
It,
early neurological stimulation.
that's it. ENS. ENS, in
Yes,
other words.
I was trying to use the correct name. So it's
That's all right.
basically, there's various exercises that you can do, which kind of relates to touch. So it's kind of touching their feet, holding them in different positions and whatnot. And it's designed to, sort of create a little bit of stress, but also to help build, but good stress, not stress in a bad way, but good
Mm,
stress to help build their
mm,
resilience a little bit. And then, you sort of do that for the first week from day 3 up to day 10.
mm.
And then you can also do that with scent as well. So you pick a different scent for each day, whether it
All
be,
right.
sort of household things like, some of your herbs, not the ones that are like really strong, like cayenne pepper or chili powder or something like that, but your natural herbs that you get, like your
Yes.
oregano and things like that. You can grab bits and bobs, sort of from outside. And what you would
Yeah.
do would be, you can record the pup's reaction to it. So it's things like, if they have no reaction, whether they move towards the item or scent, or and whether
Mm.
they sort of like move away from it. So again, it's just building that little bit of resilience there as well.
Yeah, brilliant. I love that. I was going to mention as well is that when the puppy goes home, if that's either 8, 10, or 12 weeks, and we've got this thing with vaccinations now that they have
Yeah,
to wait or they get spaced out, and that's quite a key what we call the sensitive period for dogs, and they need
yeah.
to sort of have all these different novel experiences. So don't get so hung up on that you can't take your puppy out. You should put it in like a puppy sling
Oh, I've
so they
got a
can.
puppy sling. I do that with
Yes,
all of mine.
that's
Yeah,
yeah.
so
So I
good.
just thought it was good to touch on that. That even though they don't have their second vax, you wouldn't let them interact maybe with other dogs or out on the street, but take them out so they can experience those novel sounds,
Yeah,
sights, and
absolutely.
smells.
Or, if you've got vaccinated dogs in the family, it's fine for them to come in and visit pup. Absolutely, as long as they're vaccinated. It's just, yeah, pup can't go on the floor outside. But there's
Yeah,
nothing wrong with, bringing in novel things from outside as well, sort of like leaves,
that's a
other
good idea.
scents, and, sort of stones and anything like that at all that, sort of pup can explore.
Yeah, brilliant. Perfect. So moving on then to when the dachshund goes through adolescence. So it's quite a tricky time for them. So it can be a lot for the dog and the owners and
Yeah.
pet parents. What tips do you have or would you like to share for this tricky stage?
So one of my dogs was quite a difficult adolescent dog. And yeah, I can completely relate to anybody who may struggle with this. And, from my own experience, the only thing I can say is, first of all, it doesn't last forever and you do come out the other side of it. But it's
Yeah.
also being aware that it's going to happen, behaviours and things that the dog was maybe happy to do before could go backwards. Things like toilet training could go backwards.
Yeah.
You know, particularly with my male dogs, I found they can all of a sudden become more fearful of things.
Mm,
Mm. They can be seen as, sort of ignoring things that you're asking them to do.
right.
And just in general, you know, not being able to do the things that they could do previously. And again,
Mm,
it comes back to that thing that we were sort of talking about right at the very beginning when we were, sort of saying that they get branded as stubborn and things like that.
mm,
It's not about them being stubborn. It's about they are not understanding what you're wanting them to do. And because of
yeah.
how the brain and everything is developing and all the hormonal changes and things like that, it everything just kind of tends to go backwards. So
Yeah.
again, it's being really, really aware of that, and that you might have to go back to basics with a lot of your training, things like your toilet training and things like that. If they were happy with being alone before and they may not be happy with sort of being alone right now, again, that can
Mm,
be a factor. And I think it's
yeah.
just about being patient and not
Mm,
expecting them to do too much, and
yeah.
just having that real understanding. And it's not them being stubborn or a difficult dog or doing anything to spite you. It is
Mm,
just one of those developmental things that everybody goes through, and humans go through it as well. you know
yeah.
there are all sorts of stories about teenagers getting up to
Yeah.
this, that, and the next thing, when they go through adolescence and when, they're in their teens and things like that. And it's exactly
Yeah.
the same for our dogs.
So yeah, obviously it happens a lot earlier. So I wanted to touch on the point you said about males being a bit more fearful. So they do go through, and not a lot of pet parents may know this, is the second fear cycle. It's normally from about 8 to 10 months. Is that right?
Yeah, and although it's kind of called a second fear cycle, it is more to do with adolescence and the hormonal changes.
Right. I did wonder that because I was thinking they've
Yeah,
got this second fear cycle. Like, I don't really know what that means, but then they've got adolescence. They've got all this brain fog, and like you say, they're by
yeah,
no means meaning to ignore you or to do like things that they
yeah.
shouldn't be. But they've got a lot that they're dealing with. So you're saying it's actually sort of more of the same then.
Yeah,
The second,
yeah,
yeah.
I think so. And, again, I like to make the comparison to humans because I think a lot of the time when you're speaking to people about it in relation to their dog, if you can link it to the human concept, it's either something they've gone
Mm,
through themselves or they know someone that's gone through it. And,
yeah.
interesting what you were sort of saying about the brain fog and things like that. Obviously, when women go through perimenopause and menopause
Yeah.
and things like that. You know, I'm at that age now. You kind of become a little bit more
My
scattered. You
My
forget things,
mum, my
and
mum, bless her, she's in her 60s. She's been going through it for years, and she's still having problems. Bless her. So, yeah, you've got my respect, you ladies.
but it all joking apart, it is exactly the same for the dogs. And I think
Yeah,
if people can kind of relate to that and understand that, I think that gives people a deeper understanding of their dog.
Yeah, it's always good to compare, make comparisons. And can you, is it with smaller dogs, do they tend to start adolescence from 6 months or does it just vary?
It varies. It varies. And,
I know
with
with
some.
bigger dogs, it's like, a, yeah, go on, my love.
No, 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 no. I was just going to say, with some of my dogs, I've not even noticed them go through adolescence and hormonal changes because they've just
Oh,
been the same and, they've not been any different
that's interesting.
whatsoever. But then some of them, you really, really do notice the change. And like I say, one of my dogs really, really sticks out for me. And you probably know who that is anyway, from knowing my dogs. Um, yeah, yeah, it does vary so much. And, even with
Yeah.
like some of the girls, I mean, the girls mature at different rates. I've had dogs that have come into season, and had their first season when they've been 5 months old. And then at the
Oh,
other end of the
wow.
scale, I've had a dog that didn't have her first season till she was 13 months old. So, it's all very, very different. Very, very
Yeah.
different what they go
Do
through.
female and male Dachshunds go through adolescence at different ages? Or,
I would say some of the girls are earlier.
yeah.
I mean, I start to notice things with the boys around sort of 7, 8 months. And like I say, with the girls, they can come into season sort of as early as 5 or 6 months. So yeah,
Yeah.
it does. I do think in general, the girls probably go through it a little bit earlier.
Yeah. And what I was saying earlier is that I think the bigger dogs tend to be later, around about 18 months or 12 to 18 months, but the smaller
Yeah.
dogs do tend to start earlier. So yeah, that's really interesting. So if there's one thing that if there's one thing you wished all Dachshund pet parents, guardians knew, what would it be?
I would say probably the biggest thing is whatever you're going through, you're not alone.
Mm,
You're not. And, it's absolutely fine for you to reach out for help. Don't sort of
yeah.
struggle by yourself or think you're the only one that's going through it. A lot of the time, when people get a new puppy, it is very overwhelming. It's like when you have a
Yes.
child for the first time, it is, it's very, very emotional and sort of very, very similar. And, people struggle and, I like to call it the puppy blues, but that is something a bit like the baby blues. Again, the human analogy. It's
Yeah.
very, very real for a lot of people. And if you've got a dog or pup that's keeping you up half the night, and you're sleep deprived, and you know you can't get your dog to do what you want them to do, and they're not doing this and they're not doing that. It is really, really emotional. And to anybody, I would say, don't suffer in silence. Reach out for help.
Brilliant. My God, we've literally sailed through this episode. It's literally been jam packed with information. I love it. So, we're going to spend the next sort of 5 minutes or so just sort of wrapping up. So, for someone who might be struggling right now, what would you say to them to make them feel more hopeful or to help them
Just,
feel more hopeful?
just whatever it is that you're going through at the moment, it is just a point in your pet's journey, you know, and, just sort of reiterating around, the adolescence side of things, yes, that can start at any time from, 5, 6, 7 months and go on, until sort of 18 months to 2 years. And,
Yeah.
you know, it's, it is just that moment in time. And
Yeah.
once you've kind of gone through that and things settle down, you'll kind of look back on it and think, oh, okay, it wasn't that bad. I probably would do that again. Yeah.
Yeah.
Whatever anybody's going through, it isn't forever. And like I say, it is just that point in the pet's life.
Yeah, I love that. And basically, if someone was looking at getting a Dachshund, you'd recommend them researching the breed, wouldn't you, and doing their
Yeah,
homework.
100%. And, I think particularly just sort of going back to what we were talking about earlier with how I select my puppy owners. So I have a form that a potential puppy owner has to fill in because I basically want to know everything about this person, what they do, what their work is, what their family setup is, and this, that, and the next thing. But
That's good. You're thorough.
interestingly, one of the questions that I do ask on there is around, are they aware of the potential health issues that Dachshunds can have? And there are, sort of some
Yes,
quite serious health issues that they can have. So I
that's
think,
right.
you know, not to put the sort of downer on someone wanting to get a puppy, but I think, with anything, you've got to go into it, with your eyes wide open and actually,
Yeah.
be prepared for the fact that, we as breeders do as much as we possibly can around, selecting dogs for temperament, conformation. We do all the relevant
Mm,
health tests to make sure,
mm,
that we're breeding the healthiest puppies that we possibly can. But
yeah.
there's only so much we can do, because
Yeah.
there is still a small chance that, something might happen, sort of later on down the line. So really it's, sort of nailing people down and, making sure that people are aware of that. And actually, if
Yeah.
something does go wrong, are they going to be prepared for it, um,
Yeah.
and what that's likely to involve. And then, it's around sort of researching the breed, things like how much exercise the breed needs, what sort of exercise they need, what sort of things they're going to find most rewarding, what sort of mental stimulation are they going to enjoy, you know, things like, for example, the fact that they're a scent hound and they're very, very scent driven. So tapping into that sort of thing and, just getting
Mm,
people to research so they can understand what the dog is that they're getting and how they're going to
mm,
provide the best possible enriching life for that dog. And, you
yeah.
know, we can educate as much as we possibly can, as breeders. And, there's probably breeders out there that maybe don't go into as much detail and give as much information as I do. But,
Mm,
I kind of like people to know everything before they
yeah.
then make a commitment.
Yeah, I just want to quickly touch on just about IVDD. So we
Yes.
mentioned about obviously they're doing their research, but IVDD is
Yep.
something that potential people should know about, isn't it? Because it could happen.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely. And, it's also as well being aware of the condition. It's a condition that affects their back and can lead to
that's right.
paralysis.
Yeah,
Sometimes dogs need surgery for it. Other times, they can be rehabilitated with, sort of conservative treatment like pain relief, crate rest, things like that. I mean, I've seen dogs recover without surgery, and then I've seen some that
oh,
have needed surgery. I've seen some that have had surgery 2 or 3 different times. So, it's being aware of that and
yeah.
understanding that, the disease does exist. And whilst we do everything we possibly can to minimize it, but it's
Mm,
also, as a breeder, giving your puppy owners advice on how to mitigate against the risks. So the types of exercise, the activities you allow your dog to do, things like
mm,
keeping their weight to a good weight, looking at diet and, sort of everything like that. And it's kind of giving people that awareness around
yeah.
that.
Yeah, I just thought it was really important just to touch on it because it is
Yeah,
something, that you do see. And I just think if someone was new to the breed, it is something they should really be aware of and they want to look
absolutely.
into.
But also, sort of off the back of that as well, there is another condition that they can suffer from, which is a condition that affects their eyes. So it's called progressive retinal atrophy,
PRA.
PRA. So you've heard of it.
Yeah.
So yeah, basically what that is, that's a condition that affects their eyes. So what, as a breeder, what you have to do is you have to test all your breeding stock to see whether they carry the gene or whether they're clear of it. And what you have to do within your breeding program, dogs that carry the gene, absolutely fine. They won't be affected by it. They just carry the gene and it means that they can pass it on to their offspring. But what you have to do with breeding is you have to then put them to a dog that's clear of the gene. So
Right.
what will then happen is each puppy within that litter has a 50-50 chance of being a carrier or being clear of the gene. But what you can't do is, if you've got 2 carriers of the gene, you can't breed them together because there's a 50-50 chance that the puppies will either be carriers or they'll be affected. And if they're affected, it means they could go blind at some point later on in their life.
Oh gosh.
So
Yeah.
yeah, again,
Yeah.
health testing, and if anyone's looking to get a puppy, these are the sorts of questions that that people need to be asking
It, sh-
breeders, and
it
what health
should.
tests have been done.
Yeah. The only reason I knew about because the toy poodles had to be tested for it.
Yeah,
So it's important, like you say, if you're getting a puppy, that you do ask that they've had these relevant health checks and stuff.
yeah, absolutely, and not only just asking, but actually ask to see
Seeing the result.
evidence of it.
Yeah, see the evidence. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
100%.
definitely. Brilliant. So I absolutely love the breed. Obviously, I've met you. I've obviously helped look after your guys a couple of times and seen them when I come around for a cuppa. And Kimmy seems to love me, but I'm sure she's like that with everyone. She likes to give me a wash.
She loves everyone, that dog.
So I mean, they're just I walk a few as well. So we've got a few Daxies on our books, and like they're just full of character. I just think like they're really spirited.
They really are, and they're so funny. They are so funny, and like I say, each of my dogs, they bring something completely different
Their own
to the table.
personalities.
I mean, I've got dogs that make me laugh from the minute I get up to the minute I go to bed, because they're just so funny and the things that they do. And then you've got the real, like, soft ones that are like really really cuddly, and then you've got the others that are more scent driven than the others, so you can go out and do some training and have some real fun with them, whereas some of the others, they're kind of like, they're not too fussed about it. They'd rather sit and have a cuddle on the sofa. But each one of my dogs brings something different to the table, and yeah, they're
Yeah,
amazing. I'm biased, but
they
they
are.
are amazing.
Yeah, I love them as well. They're such little characters. So, Nikki, where can our listeners find out more about your work or to follow your gorgeous gang?
So I have a Facebook page, which is Opidax Dachshunds. So that's OPIEDAX Dachshunds. That's my
Yeah.
Facebook page. And then I've got a website, which is www.opidax.co.uk.
Oh, and they can reach out to you if they want to get a new gorgeous Daxy puppy or join your waiting list.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, our waiting list for this year and next year is already open. Um,
Right.
so, if anyone is looking for a pup and they want to join a waiting list, absolutely get in touch. But also as well, if there's anybody sort of listening that's struggling with any element of their Dachshund's behaviour, you
Yeah.
know, like I say, don't suffer in silence, reach out,
Mm.
and I'm more than happy to help anyone. So yeah, feel free to get in contact.
Brilliant. They can just get in touch with via your website or on Facebook, yeah?
Yeah, Eva is absolutely fine.
Cool. Brilliant. So do reach out to Nicky. Nicky Hammel, one of our breed specialists. It's been fantastic talking to you about the Dachshund today. Thank you for joining me on the Yappy Hour powered by Yappily. It's been a great conversation and we will chat again soon.
Thank you for having me. It's been lovely.
Thank you. What a brilliant episode with Nicky Hammel. Here are just a few of the takeaways from our chat today. Number 1. Dachshunds are bold, bright and deeply sensitive. Understanding their emotional world is the key to supporting them. Number 2. Common struggles like barking or reactivity often stem from fear or frustration, not naughtiness. Number 3. Early support, enrichment and positive training can make a world of difference for both puppies and adults. Number 4. Responsible breeding plays a huge role in setting up dogs for a lifelong success. Nicky, thank you so much for joining me today and for being such a brilliant voice for this amazing little breed. If you'd like to learn more about Nicky's work, be sure to check her out on social media and follow along with her fabulous Dachshund gang. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to leave a review, share it with a fellow dog lover, and subscribe so you never miss an episode of the Yappy Hour. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.